Welcome to Windows on the World. We're going to do a follow-up to our last show, Momentum and Labour Zionism. Now this follows on quite nicely with something that's happened recently, with Nigel Farage being attacked by this organisation, Hope Not Hate. And this charity, this Hope Not Hate, now begging for money to take Farage to court for his comments, which were actually merited and quite accurate. We're going to carry on from that last show, and we're going to look at this Hope Not Hate Limited and the connections there, especially later on to the Israel lobby and this Israeli agitator, this MP, Ruth Smith. So Hope Not Hate was founded in 2004, it says on their website, to provide a positive antidote to the politics of hate, or actually what goes against this warmongering and the policies and police state of the Blairites and the Tories here working towards this world global governance under the UN, because that's what all these organisations are actually working for. So this Hope Not Hate was one of these organisations that the Joe Cox Memorial Fund was set up to help, and the other two were the White Helmets and the Royal Voluntary Service. And you can find out quite a lot about the White Helmets online. They're being heavily promoted, and when we look into it, they're nothing like what they appear to be. This ties into this spin doctor now, an Israeli agent, Ruth Smith, who we'll be talking about in this show. But first, writing for The Guardian, this Nick Lowles from Hope Not Hate has likened the UKIP politician Nigel Farage to Donald Trump, saying both seek to vilify abuse and bully their opponents into silence, in part through abuse from their supporters on social media. So of course it's all this narcissistic victim mentality that we hear from this group so much. Lowell's comments follow on, it says, from a row on Tuesday, which began when Brendan Cox, whose wife was murdered in June by neo-Nazi terrorist Thomas Mayer, replied to a tweet by Farage, blaming the German Chancellor Angela Merkel for the Berlin truck attack. This was a slippery slope, Cox warned. Now, so speaking afterwards on LBC radio, Farage accused Cox of links to extremism via Hope Not Hate. So this charity, this Hope Not Hate, are now begging for money from the public to bring a case against Nigel Farage. So we have this time wasting and pettiness on a massive scale here. Now this is what happens when this group are upset by something. They assume that they have the right not to be offended, as they obviously so easily are. It's almost impossible to be part of their mind virus unless you've been programmed into it. This is what we're seeing. These organisations, they keep the public focused on trivia, played out by these non-journalists and puppet presenters of the mainstream who just promote this nonsense all day long. So really it's a distraction exercise. It's all about this narcissism and cult of personality and being offended and saying Trump's sexist and all this trivia, rather than actually focusing on what's really going on with these wars and these lobbyists who are bringing us into these wars, our governments being controlled. This propaganda pantomime carries on, and we're going to look at recent events instigated by the likes of Labour MP and his Israeli agent Ruth Smith, who's connected to Hope Not Hate and many other organisations and individuals working for Israeli propaganda and control. So this is a follow-up to our show which looked at Zionism in the Labour Party. It was called Momentum and Labour Zionism. And it was about how John Landsman's companies were controlling Labour Party momentum. Now we're going to get into this anti-Semitism campaign, and I've found something from Electronic Intifada from the 4th of April 2014 which refers to this Ruth Smith, who was the person who got up and stormed out of the Chakrabarti inquiry into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And this was merely because black journalist Mark Wadsworth, who's actually been on this show, got up and said that certain elements of the room were working hand in hand with the right-wing media, And Ruth Smith took this as a personal affront for some reason and made it all about herself and shrieked and walked out of the room. Mr. Wadsworth was later attacked by a journalist outside, and it was an attack, demanding basically that he go and apologise. And he said, apologise for what, quite rightly. Now, Ruth Smith started a Twitter storm which basically said that Wadsworth had stated that you, Ruth Smith, are working hand in hand with right-wing media, which was completely untrue. So let's go into the background of this woman, because nobody had really heard of her until this time. But this article from 2014 states former Israel lobby spin doctor aims for seat in UK Parliament. Now, she's one of those aiming for Stoke North. A safe Labour seat is Ruth Smith. On her flashy new website and talking to the local press, Smith portrays a left-wing veneer as a proud anti-fascist. She is the deputy director of anti-racist group Hope Not Hate. Now, Hope Not Hate, I've been putting a lot of spin about bringing in the so-called neo-Nazis. Now, this is also very interesting, this term neo-Nazis, which is being used all the time now. Now, it says here in its latest issue, Parapolitical magazine Notes from the Borderland detailed Smith's history as part of a huge and detailed article and how far-right Labour hijacked the Hope Not Hate campaign. This week they published some of their research into Smith's career on their website, stating the following leaflet has been distributed far and wide in the constituency. The editorial collective are arguing that Labour members should not select Smith. Among other issues, the leaflet argues that if Smith becomes your MP, do you really think she will be genuinely open-minded on important foreign policy matters such as war and peace, or subordinate to the whims of those making policy in Washington and Tel Aviv rather than Tunstall, an area of Stoke-on-Trent? Now, starting in 2005, Smith did a stint as a Director of Public Affairs and Campaigns for BICOM, the British Israel Communications and Research Centre. There she reportedly charged with strengthening the group's relations with the Foreign Office, party leaders, think tanks and academia. Now, the group arranges for influential figures such as journalists to take trips to Israel. These have included trips to the Herzliya Conference, a major security event at which powerful business and political figures discuss how to reinforce Israeli occupation and apartheid. Smith herself is listed on the conference's website as having attended in January 2007, apparently in her BICOM capacity. Speaking that year was current Prime Minister, then Leader of the Opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu. In 2003, with ugly racism, he told the conference that Palestinian citizens of Israel were a demographic threat. Speaking to the Telegraph in 2011, Smith admitted to being at a breakfast meeting in the embassy, but said, "I have no recollection of saying what has been attributed to me. I would not consider myself to be a source for the US government." Ruth Smith did not immediately reply to an emailed request for comment, but this article may be updated if she does. Now, that was from 2014, so let's forward it to this year. Now, she was a main instigator of this anti-Semitism campaign, which came out of the anti-Semitism campaign which launched the Chakrabarti inquiry into anti-Semitism when there wasn't any. So let's move forward now to 2016. This is from voxpoliticalonline.com. It says official records show that Ruth Smith was funded by two ultra-wealthy figures from the same pro-Israel organisation she once worked for. But these relations have been overlooked by the British press, which have extensively reported on her allegations of anti-Semitic abuse at the hands of Jeremy Corbyn supporters, which, as we know, was non-existent. So the Register for Legislators' Financial Interests shows that Smith declared a donation of £5,000 from Pozhu Zabludovich's company Tamares Real Estates in June last year. Now, this Pozhu Zabludovich is the son of an Israeli arms dealer, as indeed so is he. He also funded David Cameron and is at the back of funding a lot of people through the Israel lobby. You need to look into him. particularly David Cameron. And what David Cameron came out after he'd been funded by Zabludovic was, of course, that anybody who said anything about 9/11 being a Jewish plot, etc., all this comes on the back of him funding now this Ruth Smith. Now, Zabludovic is the billionaire property speculator who was once reported to own 40% of downtown Las Vegas. He used his wealth, inherited from Israeli arms dealer father, to establish BICOM, the British Israel Communications and Research Centre. Now, this really starts tying together, doesn't it? It's tying Ruth Smith to BICOM and, of course, through Zabludovic. Now, Ruth Smith has also had a donation from Trevor Chin, who was former chair of the Quikfit chain of motor garages. This was about the same time. Chin, who sits on BICOM's executive committee, has long been a Labour donor and has funded leadership rivals to left-wing pro-Palestinian Labour Jeremy Corbyn. So again, we've got this disruption being caused within the Labour Party against Corbyn by this Zionist lobby. Now, Ruth Smith was also a lobbyist for Sodexo, who we've actually reported on before, who are running prisons. And they have an extremely bad reputation in this regard. You can look that up online, Sodexo prisons. But it says here, Smith exits Sodexo for pro-Israel lobby group. This is from 2005. So she's been lobbying for a long time. She joined BICOM in 2005. It says here, Smith takes up the post at the start of November. She replaces Director of Comms Lee Patar, who last month joined Good Relations. Her brief has an added emphasis to strengthen the group's relations with the Foreign Office, party leaders, think tanks and academia, said BICOM CEO Daniel Sheck. Now, it says the group was set up in the year 2000 to counter alleged anti-Israeli messages in the British media, but now works more generally to shift public in favour of Israel. So her links to think tanks and these groups is all there in the public domain. So basically, Ruth Smith is an agitator for Israel within the Labour Party. The way that this is being used against those in the Labour Party is to control the narrative.